I'm Bowinn Ma, Minister of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness, and I'm honored to be with all of you here today from the territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. Before we get into today's briefing on drought, I'd like to take a moment to provide a quick update on the wildfire situation in BC. As of today, there are 345 wildfires burning in BC, over half of which remain out of control. Since April 1st, 1,034 wildfires have burned over 1.2 million hectares of land. In the last 3 days, 109 fires have been caused by lightning and 5 fires have been caused by human activity. We are anticipating continued extreme fire behavior, and all of us need to do our part to prevent the situation from getting any worse, no matter where you are in the province. New and expanded evacuation orders and alerts came online in the Caribou, Kamloops, and Northwest fire centers. But the hard work of crews and support staff paid off in the Northwest, where the Powers Creek wildfire was reclassified as being held. As a result, the regional district of Bulkley-Nechako, has rescinded their evacuation order, though the evacuation alert remains. Under the Wildfire Act, the province has access to all of the tools needed to coordinate provincial and international resources to suppress wildfires. We continue to work with the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Centre to bring in additional out-of-province resources and have requested up to 1,000 additional international personnel. We will be bringing in an incident management team from Australia on August 15th. These additional resources will support approximately 160 international personnel from Mexico and the United States currently deployed in BC. And we are formally requesting today additional resources from the federal government. I've spoken with Minister Bill Blair, and we're optimistic our request will secure additional resources for our province. BC Wildfire Service has also contracted additional air support capacity in recent days. We are continuously assessing the situation across the province closely, and we will not hesitate to take action to keep people and communities safe. This includes assessing whether we have an operational need for a provincial state of emergency. So far, we have not used this power because it will not provide us with more resources to fight fires, as those powers already exist in the Wildfire Act. A provincial state of emergency is specific to tools under the Emergency Program Act to support people and communities, such as securing shelter for people and securing supply chains. As I mentioned, we have not yet needed these powers province-wide, but we will continue to ensure that we have all of the tools we need at our disposal to keep people and communities safe. I want to recognize the BC Wildfire Service and emergency management teams that are working around the clock to suppress fires, support communities, and share up-to-date information with the public. Now, I'd like to turn to the current drought situation in the province. As I indicated on Monday, we are monitoring the drought situation very closely. Drought and wildfires go hand in hand, and I'm joined virtually by Jonathan Boyd, hydrologist with the River Forecast Center, who will present a technical briefing on the current situation. Today, we will share information including what our government is doing, as well as the steps that people and companies can take to respond to the current drought situation affecting many areas of the province. Droughts have impacted other regions in the world for years, including India, Australia, and California, and can impact people and communities in different ways, resulting in agricultural, health, economic, and environmental consequences. While it is not uncommon for British Columbians to face droughts, the level and extent of drought that we're witnessing this early on in the season is deeply concerning. We've been preparing for the drought conditions since last fall, and that's why we updated the BC Drought and Water Scarcity Response Plan in April. We have been working with communities over the past several months to prepare, including working with local government partners and First Nations to develop area-specific drought plans. Shortly, you will hear from experts about the severity of drought across the province and how our government is working to address it and what people can do to help. The province uses a 1 through 5 drought classification to explain the severity and appropriate level of response to drought conditions. Jonathan will provide more details for you on that classification. But for now, it is important to know that drought level 5 means almost certain that an area will see adverse impacts in both communities and ecosystems. As of today, 4 out of 34 water basins in British Columbia have been lifted to level 5. Those basins are Fort Nelson, Bulkley Lake, West Vancouver Island, and East Vancouver Island. 18 water basins are in level 4. That means over 2/3 of our water basins are in level 4 or 5. These conditions require action from everyone in BC. As our government works with local communities and First Nations, I'm calling on everyone, including businesses, to follow water restrictions set by First Nations or local authorities and take steps to conserve water even above and beyond those restrictions. Water is a precious resource, and we are fortunate to have some of the best water in the world. Every drop counts, and that's why everyone needs to do their part. That means thinking about small changes that you can make in your daily routine, such as watering lawns sparingly, if at all. Taking shorter showers. You can save 19 liters of water for every minute that you reduce a shower. Only doing full loads of dishes or laundry. Every load of laundry uses up to 190 liters of water. And turn off the tap when brushing your teeth or shaving. If each person and company makes a few small changes to how they use water, it can have a profound impact. If you are a water license holder, consider ways to reduce your withdrawal of water from the associated stream or aquifer. We are currently encouraging voluntary reductions at this time, but regulatory actions may be introduced if necessary. The BC Energy Regulator has already issued and expanded water suspensions for oil and gas operators. For the farming community, who I know is particularly impacted by drought. Right now, it's critically important to monitor and manage your water withdrawal from streams and wells. I know that many of you already do this, but now is the time for regular inspections. It may be helpful, It might be helpful to understand how the province monitors drought conditions in BC. Water basins differ from water reservoirs, but they are connected. To understand broader drought conditions, the province regularly monitors water basins across the province, which includes lakes, rivers, creeks, and groundwater wells. Some water reservoirs, on the other hand, are crucial storage facilities carefully managed by their respective license holders, such as First Nations and local authorities. These reservoirs ensure a steady supply of water to nearby communities. People can access information about water basins through the BC Drought Information Portal. They can access information about water reservoirs through their local First Nation or local authority. I urge everyone to connect with their First Nation or local authority through their website to receive information about the water restrictions in your area. I want to be clear. While the maps you'll see today and the maps that you'll see show very generalized information, the situation is very different in individual communities depending on their water sources. For example, one community who gets their water from one source might be in stage 3 right now, while a community 30 minutes away who draws their water from a different water source might be in stage 5. People are going to see very different situations in different communities, even in communities that are relatively close to one another. That makes responding challenging because supports have to be tailored and local and working with individual communities. Our government is working directly with communities to respond to these challenges. In the months leading up to this drought season, we have been helping communities get prepared and more resilient to drought. We're continuing to work directly with communities now as they put in place plans and water restrictions based on local situations. This month, EMCR will be releasing shortly a template. EMCR being Emergency Management and Climate Readiness will be releasing shortly a template to support emergency planning for water scarcity, which includes a water scarcity emergency exercise toolkit, as well as other tools such as a water demand survey to assist First Nations and local authorities in gathering information regarding water demand. A reimbursement program is in place to reimburse First Nations and local governments for the transportation of alternate drinking water if required. We have also released a notice to vendors so that they can self-identify as being able to supply and or transport bottled or potable water or provide water treatment services such as desalination. With the activation of the BC Drought and Water Scarcity Response Plan in April of this year, area-specific drought plans are under development with Indigenous nations, local authority, water licensees, and stakeholders. To support BC farmers and ranchers, we're turning over every stone to try and find more feed for producers, despite the shortages across Western Canada. And we'll be presenting information to the federal government in the coming days to support the development of an agro recovery package so that disaster impacted farms can get back into production and to ensure that there are supports for producers who need it. That's what's already in place or in the works, and we're going to continue to take action with local communities to support them. If a community requires assistance, I encourage them to contact their local emergency management office. Just like with all of the other challenges that we have faced over the last few years, by working together, we will get through this. And I want to sincerely thank British Columbians that have already been following their local water restrictions and doing their part. I want you to know that you are making a difference. And right now, I'll turn it over to Jonathan Boyd with the River Forecast Center. John.
Hey, thank you, Minister Ma. Just sharing my presentation here. Hi, my name is Jonathan Boyd. I'm a hydrologist with the River Forecast Center. I'm calling in from Victoria, which is the traditional lands of the Lekwungen people, known today as the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. And I'm grateful to live and work on these lands. So the story of the current drought situation really begins exactly a year ago. Last spring was relatively cool and wet, and we had a delayed freshet period or high flow season. But that switched in the early stages of July. And looking back from the cumulative precipitation for the last 365 days, this map is available from Agricultural and Agri-Food Canada. We can see that the province measured pretty well 40 to 85% of average precipitation over the year. So this is a cumulative impact drought, and it really got kickstarted and pushed further when we hit hotter temperatures in May. And it really was record temperatures across BC. This plot here is for the historic record of the Agassiz area. And where it's unique with Agassiz is it goes back 130 years of record. And the rainbow colors just show the previous statistics of the 7-day mean temperature. Mean temperature is an average of the maximum and the minimum temperature, and just averaged over a 7-day period to smooth things out a little bit. But the anomaly that did happen in May, especially in mid-May, really was extraordinary. What didn't reach the actual temperatures that we got at the heat dome in late June of 2021, but we were getting 9-10 degrees above normal from an average of 7 days for quite a period of time. And what that led to was the earliest melt of the mountain snowpack that we've seen. So the province has a network of automated snow weather stations. An example there is on the right of Redfish Creek in the West Kootenay. Essentially, it's just a bladder that's filled with antifreeze that's covered with sheet metal, and it weighs the amount of snow that falls. And we get data on an hourly basis, but we can plot that data on a daily basis. And very similar to the Agassiz plot, just the rainbow colors show the historical trend and statistics. And this is a composite of long-term stations across BC. And what's interesting to note is that the current year, which is in black, ended up being the earliest snow-free year at those mountain snow stations. And it melted quicker than some of the previous years where it melted fast, which were also fairly low snowpack years across the province. And this year was a little different, where we did have essentially near average snowpack in late April. And it was that incredible heat of May that initiated and triggered that rapid melt of the snowpack. So with less precipitation and a fairly rapid melt and early melt, we're seeing the response in stream flows, and it's very low. So as of July 10th, 81 stations across the province were at their all-time record low for that date. And that's about a quarter of the stations. And another 187 stations were at the 5th percentile or lower, and that's more than 50%. And what the 5th percentile means would be it has a 5% chance of occurring on any given year, or a recurrence period of a 1 in 20 year type drought. So having over half of the sites already below a 1 in 20 year drought is pretty extraordinary. And we do have the capacity to look at how these changes happen on a daily basis. And again, going back to last year, it really started because of how dry it was in the summer and fall. And we did experience some of the lowest flows throughout the province in fall and winter that we've ever had. It's a little bit tricky to truly understand what that means. So it's easier to look at individual sites just to see what that means from a graphical representation. And this is a hydrograph. A hydrograph just means plotting flow data or water level data onto the year. And looking at the Fraser River at Hope, and again, the more rainbow colors are the historical statistics for the daily stream flow at the Fraser River at Hope. This station goes back 110 years, so there's a very long record. And as you can see from the July 11th, 2023 numbers of 2,641 cubic meters per second, we're well below anything that has ever occurred this early in the season. And compared to last year, where we were essentially near the peak of the flow last year, and then we still ended up in a pretty significant drought in the September and October period. So we're well below normal, and we didn't actually get to the levels we're at now until September 7th of last year for the Fraser River at Hope. And I'll roll through a few more sites throughout the province and show the current drought level status of those rivers, just to show the dramatics of each individual location. So the North Thompson River near McClure, this is just north of Kamloops, again showing incredibly low compared to any historical previous flow at this time. It's at level 4 for the entire North Thompson region. For the Solom River near Courtenay, the hydrograph changes a little bit. The previous two examples showed peaks occurring in the spring and still staying high in the summer, just from the snowmelt process. On Vancouver Island, the highest flows occur in the fall and winter from rainstorms. So I'll just zoom in a little bit to see where we are this year for the Solom River near Courtenay. And it's essentially tracking at the lowest on record, and even quite a bit lower than what it ever got to around September of last year. And it's matching about where it was in 2015, when the snowpack was almost negligible on Vancouver Island. So it really shows how dramatic the snowmelt was this year. And then also the San Juan River near Port Renfrew, same as the Solom River, just doing a zoom in here. So Vancouver Island, as of today, both the east and west did move up to level 5 drought. And having a look where we were last year compared to this year, significantly lower for the San Juan River. It's a little bit different between the Solom River, which is near Courtenay, and there are water users. For the San Juan River, there aren't real water users there. So it does represent that natural state of the situation. But until we get into the period of time when we get precipitation events and atmospheric rivers, the San Juan River will stay quite low through the season. And moving a bit north to the Bulkley River near Houston, this would be in between the Burns Lake Vanderhoof area and then Smithers. The flows are extremely low, again, for this time of year, much lower than last year. And it shows the very fast peak from the warm, hot weather that we experienced. And it actually began in late April and really peaked in May. Over to the Pine River at East Pine, it's at level 4. Minister Ma mentioned that the BC Energy regulator has suspended short-term water withdrawals from the oil and gas companies in this region, and it's pretty common throughout the Peace and the Northeast to be well below normal for this time of year. And having a look at the Slocan River near Crescent Valley, this is in the West Kootenay, which is at level 4, another one showing maybe about a week ago, it actually was in the lowest on record. There was a little bit of a bump up from some recent rain in the West Kootenay, the Boundary region, parts of the Okanagan this week, so that was welcome. But it's not necessarily one rainfall that's going to get us out of a drought situation. It'll have to be ongoing precipitation events and essentially cold conditions through the summer and wet conditions to get us into a better place where we're not in these high level droughts. And just switching from flow and rivers to Shuswap Lake, a lot of the bigger lakes and important lakes in the province are actually managed. They may have a dam associated with them. So they're a little bit different than Shuswap Lake, which is showing the actual natural situation, and seeing here that based on the period of record at Shuswap Lake, that it is at its lowest level. Lakes do take a little bit more time to actually get to their lowest level for the season, which tends to happen actually in the fall and winter months. But it is a good representation of what the natural lakes in the province are looking like. And that, again, is compared to, or in contrast to the reservoirs that may be used for drinking water, like the Capital Regional District or Metro Vancouver, which can actually hold and store water. Flipping over to the groundwater situation, the province does have a network of groundwater observation wells, and these are showing a very similar trend as the flow stations and water level on lakes. So for the most part, about half of the groundwater sites are below the 10th percentile. So again, half the sites reaching a level that you might get once every 10 years. As a reminder, for more information on the BC Drought and Water Scarcity Response Plan that is available, Minister Ma did mention that it was updated in April 2023. It was really revamped in 2021, and we moved from a 4-level, 1 to 4 drought level situation to actually having 6 levels, level 0 being that there isn't a drought. And within that, there is information on what the core indicator thresholds are. In this case, I've shown them with the 30-day precipitation percentiles and the stream flow percentiles, but there's also additional indicators, which can be the temperature of a river, the groundwater situation, reservoir storage, and a multitude of others. It is a very comprehensive document. It does outline the province's work to respond to drought. Also, another useful tool to look at is the BC Drought Information Portal. This is where you will be able to see the update in the drought levels that typically happens on Thursday morning at 9 a.m. On this Drought Information Portal, there are also tabs specific to certain regions like the West Coast, the South Coast, Thompson, Okanagan, and Kootenay Boundary. And those regions will actually manage subset smaller systems, so troublesome rivers or creeks that tend to get lower. And it is possible for those smaller creeks to be at a higher drought level than the overall basin. So having a look at the drought levels, which were just released as of this morning, we are at level 5 now for 4 of the regions. That's the Northeast, the Bulkley Lakes, and East and West Vancouver Island. There were some more increases to level 4, such as Haida Gwaii and areas in the East and West Kootenay and Lower Columbia. And it is very widespread. What's unusual this year is how early it is and how widespread it is. And plotted the maps from the last 2 years and kind of highlighting there with the historic drought levels arrow where we were at July 15th last year. So essentially the same time frame. And 2021 was quite a dramatic year for drought, really kick-started from the heat dome in late June, and we thought that was bad. The same for 2022. By the time we got to October, we thought, of course, that was a pretty extreme drought. So it's a lot more widespread and a lot earlier than normal this year. What's going to happen? That's always a question I get asked. And the real answer is we just don't know past about 7 to 10 days in terms of the weather forecast. So Environment and Climate Change Canada does provide seasonal forecasts for temperature and precipitation. Sometimes it's accurate, sometimes it's not. For the most recent release, which was about 2 weeks ago, for July, August, and September, they were predicting a high likelihood of above normal temperatures for July, August, and September. And then on the right, the seasonal precipitation forecast, it shows potentially drier than normal conditions for Vancouver Island and the South Coast, and also around Prince George, the Almanica, and the Peace region. But really, there is no way to know for sure. And the biggest fear would be if we have dry conditions like we did last year moving into September and October. And only time will tell. But if that were to happen, we could end up in a pretty significant drought at the time when flows typically are at their lowest. And that's the end of the presentation for me. And I'll pass it back to Minister Ma.
Thank you, Jonathan. And before we move on to questions from the media, I have been informed that I've actually misspoke during my earlier remarks. The incident management team from Australia, the International Resources for Wildfire Fighting. So this is in reference to the International Resources for Firefighting, the incident management team from Australia. That crew is arriving July 15th, not August 15th. I previously said August 15th. They are arriving in a matter of days, not in a matter of weeks. I will now open it up to questions from the media. We have several technical staff available to answer questions from the River Forecast Center, the Ministry of Forests, the Ministry of Agriculture and Food, the Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness, as well as the BC Wildfire Service.
Thank you. As a reminder for reporters on the phone, please press *1 to enter the queue. That's *1 to ask a question. For media in the room, please line up at the microphone provided, and please make sure to provide your full name and outlet. Media will be limited to one question and one follow-up. We'll be starting in the room today. Please go ahead.
Hi, Mike Hager, Globe and Mail. Thanks for having this availability. Wondering, apart from oil and gas, whether any industries will face restrictions, thinking maybe golf courses or bottled water plants. What are the other industries that may face such restrictions, and why aren't there more?
We are anticipating a very serious drought season that will require actions from everyone. That likely means every industry, every business, every individual across the province. To speak more to that, I'll refer over to the Ministry of Forests to see if they can provide maybe some additional details on what they're seeing.
Ministry of Forest staff are working directly with water licensees to seek voluntary reductions. If voluntary reductions do not happen, then regulatory action may be required in order to protect the aquatic ecosystem and fisheries population. So we are anticipating that there may be recommendations going to the Minister for orders that would see limited water use by other licensees.
Sorry, what was the end of that? By when?
Limited water use from other licensees. So we may see other water license holders for a variety of different purposes, whether it be agricultural purposes, industrial purposes, having to reduce or cease use of water through a minister order.
And did you have a follow-up?
Always. Some experts in wildfire fighting are critical of your government for almost waiting for a forecast to come into effect. As in last week, we knew of the lightning that was coming, the extremely dry conditions, and yet the call for international assistance doesn't go out until the fires are ignited. Are you alive to that criticism, and are you thinking of changing the way that such requests are put out, to better get on the fires that do ignite? These firefighters, especially from the Southern Hemisphere, take upwards of a week or two to get here. So why not, when you see a forecast, the seasonal, and then for the next 7 to 10 days, be so dire, why not put that out earlier?
It has been a very challenging wildfire season, not just here in BC, but right across Canada. We've been forecasting the need for additional resources for some time. I'll turn it over to Cliff Chapman, who can speak a bit more to how that forecasting happens, when resources are requested. But I will note that we do have international resources on the ground in British Columbia right now, and those were requested well ahead of time. Go ahead.
Thank you for the question. I will just say we've had international support in BC for the better part of the last 4 or 5 weeks. Yes, we did anticipate this significant lightning event happening across BC, and as we see, it's continuing to happen yesterday, today. The challenge is not that we didn't request the resources, is that there is limited supply of firefighting resources to support the needs across Canada. Quebec is well over 3 million hectares of fire on the landscape. Alberta, we all know, had a significant wildfire season in the spring. And so it really is about trying to support all the agencies across Canada. So we have had requests in with the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Centre over the course of the last 5 weeks. 5 weeks.
Okay, for our next question, we're going to our next reporter in the room. Please go ahead.
Hi there, Michelle Bernero, CTV. Just following up on the issue with respect to resources. I've been talking to, doing some of the stories on the forest fires, and we keep hearing from people who are like, oh, there's nobody here. We're calling the fire center, and they say they'll call back, but nobody ever calls back. We know this fire is getting closer. How short of resources are we right now to try and deal with the fires that we have burning?
I think we'll go back to Cliff, who can probably provide you a direct answer on that.
The question at our media availability we held a couple of days ago, we talked a little bit about resourcing and some of the challenges that we face in the province as well as nationally and frankly internationally. I couldn't put a number on that answer in terms of how short we are. We are surging our resources to our priority fires that are impacting communities, fires that have the potential to impact communities, as well as critical infrastructure that keeps this province running. Highways, telephone lines, internet cables, those types of things. So we continue to see resourcing on those fires. In terms of some of the fires, as Minister Ma said, we have over 250 burning in the province right now. Some of those fires that are in what we would say the backcountry are seeing less resources, but we are making every effort to partner with our industry partnerships across the province, to use our contract crews across the province to try to continue to bolster our resource numbers on all the fires across BC, but obviously trying to surge to those priority fires where we see some of that potential critical impact from these fires, in particular in the northern part of the province. So we are continuing to ask. I think it's important to note that we have a request in right now for over 1,000 personnel. We had a request in last week for roughly 400 personnel. We're starting to see that trickle into the province now, as Minister Ma has referenced. And it sounds like we're going to see success from pulling additional resources in from the United States and obviously Australia, which we spoke about earlier. So we're continuing to try to beef up the resource numbers within BC. We've been asking, as I said in my last response, we've been asking for over a month. We knew this was coming, as Jonathan did a great job explaining the drought conditions that we're in this province. BC Wildfire Service has been working closely with the River Forecast Center for the last number of months because there is a correlation between drought and wildfire. And we're seeing that correlation on the ground right now. So we've been aware of what potentially could happen. It is happening, and we continue to request resources to support the province of BC.
Can I just get a point of clarification? And then a follow-up? So I know you said you don't have exact numbers, but you gave us a rough idea of what you've requested. So are we talking that we are short thousands of firefighters?
No, I don't think that would that is fair. I would say we're putting in a request. I spoke on Monday as well about the fatigue that our staff are experiencing. They have been on really surging to fires in the Prince George Fire Center for over 2 months now, with some of the significant fires we have on the landscape up there. And we are a provincial agency, so it's all of our staff that go from any of our other fire centers to Prince George, and they work a 14-day cycle, and then they need rest days. And that goes for everyone who works for wildfire. So the request is to try to ensure we have enough resources for potential new starts, as well as the ability for us to rest our staff so that they can go back onto these fires after they're rested. So it's really trying to balance the rest and recovery and the emotional and mental and physical health of our own staff and our contractors, as well as being prepared for the lightning that continues to strike across this province and potential new starts. So I would not say we are short thousands of people. I would say we are trying to forecast into the next 7 to 10, even 14 days to try to have enough resources here that we can rest our own staff and surge to potentially new fires that could have a big impact in the province.
And my other question.
Province.
And my other question is just, can you give us an idea of what drought conditions are like specifically in Metro Vancouver and the Fraser Valley? And I'm sorry, it's probably somewhere in there, but what stage we're at here as well?
Sure. Over to the River Forecast Center.
So for Metro Vancouver and the Sunshine Coast, it's currently at level 4 right now. And then for areas in the Fraser Valley, moving up into kind of Hope area, those watersheds are at level 3 from a provincial scale. When we get into the nitty-gritty, each individual river or creek system will be different. So the provincial scales are meant to be for curtailing water license use. However, for say Metro Vancouver, they may have their own different level of drought in terms of what type of water restrictions may come out for watering lawns. And that's the same for the Fraser Valley as well. So there's a difference between the broader provincial scale drought levels versus potential individual localized levels related to municipalities, local governments, and First Nations.
Our next question will be going to the phone. Our next question will be going to the phones to Mira Baines, CBC. Please go ahead.
Thank you for taking my question. My first question is for my colleagues up north. There are low levels of water on the East Pine River in the Peace, but the energy regulator just stopped the water diversions to fracking companies yesterday on July 12th. Surely they knew that this was a problem for a while. Why did the energy regulator just stop the water diversions to fracking companies yesterday, knowing that this is a problem for a while?
I'm not sure that we'll be able to speak on behalf of the energy regulator, but we do have some staff from the Ministry of Forests here who may have some more information about licensee and regulations there.
Thanks, Minister Ma. It's Connie Chapman from the Ministry of Forests. We can follow up in regards to that question with the BC Energy Regulator, but we do know that staff in the Northeast have been watching the systems closely and looking at the usage within those systems, and also working closely with the BC Energy Regulator to ensure consistency in regards to the drought response.
Mira, did you have a follow-up?
Sure. This is just in terms of water restrictions. Where are we going to get direction from? Is it going to be a local government, or are we going to see provincial restrictions come in at some point? And what would be the tipping point for some of those water restrictions for individuals?
So through the Water Sustainability Act, the province is able to regulate water use by water licensees. Ms. Chapman had mentioned that earlier, and I'll pass it back to her to comment more on that. I will say that largely for residential use and within communities, those water restrictions would come from local governments and First Nations. And we'll be speaking with all the mayors and chiefs and chairs this afternoon about the drought conditions that we're seeing and encouraging communities to escalate their water restrictions. Over to you, Connie.
So as Minister Ma said, under the Water Sustainability Act, there are tools and with the ability to regulate water license holders. One of the tools that is being considered is known as a temporary protection order, and those are minister orders in which water license holders would have to cease use of water within areas that are defined as being water scarce and meet the specific criteria as per the legislation. And currently, those tools are being explored for some of the streams that are showing sensitivity in response to this current drought situation. So we may see those orders be recommended to the Minister for decision.
Our next question is for Richard Zussman, Global News. Please go ahead.
Considering these restrictions seem to be inevitable at this point, and we're looking at these forecasts that show this incredibly grim projection and record-breaking lows now, why not put in restrictions today?
So many communities already have water restrictions in place, and we'll be working with communities to escalate those water restrictions as quickly as possible. As you heard from the Ministry of Forests, we are actively reviewing and considering orders on water licensees, and there have already been some restrictions that have been brought in place by the BC Energy Regulator as well.
Richard, did you have a follow-up? Or did you?
What does it tangibly mean for people to be at level 4 or 5 drought? And if we continue to see these trends continue, other than the explanation I heard from Cliff around fire, like what does it just mean for people living in this province to be at this bad of a place in terms of water levels?
It would depend a lot on where you live. So depending on where you live, the consequences of extreme drought could be very different. People and ecosystems are going to see very different situations in different communities, even in communities that are relatively close. We do have the provincial drought scale that I'll turn over to the Ministry of Forests to speak to more clearly. But I will also say that when it comes to water restrictions, which can be very stressful and very difficult for people in communities, especially if we're asking them to abandon their lawns or reduce water usage in businesses that can potentially cause economic challenges for those businesses. While those are difficult, the need to take action now and sooner, it is more than about today or the next week or the next few months. Extreme drought conditions can result in long-term economic impacts as well, which we are assessing actively. So I'll turn it over to the Ministry of Forests to speak more to the kind of the different drought levels and what people can expect that they mean.
Thanks, Minister Ma. It's Connie Chapman with the Ministry of Forests. So as Jonathan Boyd from the River Forecast Center identified, we do have a 6-scale drought level from 0 to 5. Depending on where we are at, from levels 3, 4, and 5, this is where we start to see those adverse impacts. One of the impacts that is visible to all is just the low flows within the streams, and these definitely have it results within concern for the aquatic ecosystem and other aspects within the environment. As Minister Ma has identified, yes, we are short term, but it's also that long term. We want to ensure the health of the aquatic ecosystems and the sustainability of the aquatic ecosystems. As these drought levels continue and stream flows do decrease, this is where concerns in regards to fisheries populations do become a consideration that we are looking at very closely and monitoring.
Our next question is from Rob Shaw, Check News. Please go ahead.
Hi, Minister. You rattled off earlier some things people could be doing to preserve water. I wonder if you could go through that again, add in some more and speak about the kind of change in mindset people are going to have to get their heads around when it comes to their daily habits and their daily usage of water and the benefits of them doing some of the things you're suggesting there?
You know, here in British Columbia, we are blessed with bountiful water sources normally. We have some of the best water in the world, and I think a lot of British Columbians are used to being able to access as much water as they want in their day-to-day lives. Unfortunately, what we're seeing with the climate crisis is that the changing climate is creating changing conditions here in British Columbia. And one of those changing conditions is that our access to clean water is very, very challenged. The situation is severe. We need people to turn their minds to a conservation mindset now. We need people to consider whether or not they really do need to water those lawns. And to be clear, many communities will likely go to restrictions on there anyway. We need people to take shorter showers. Even a minute shorter shower saves water. If everyone does it, if millions of people are doing these small steps, like shortening showers or watering their lawns sparingly, or making sure that they're only using their dishwasher or their laundry machines when they are full loads, that does absolutely make a difference. We need people to be calm, we need people to care about this, and we need people to conserve.
Rob, did you have a follow-up?
Sure. Just for some of the other agriculture folks on the line, where does the agriculture sector and the farming and food security sectors fit into our kind of drought planning when it comes to water scarcity, irrigation for crops, feed, that type of thing? Like when it comes down to making a priority choice on water, where do the farms and that are growing our food and running our cattle fit into the usage of water?
Thank you so much for that question. And I do want to acknowledge that we are already hearing from ranchers and farmers, particularly in the north, that are facing challenges. And it is something that is very much top of mind for us, not only for the well-being of those farmers and their farms, but also from a food security perspective as well. I'll turn it over to the Ministry of Agriculture and Food.
Question, thank you. My name is Michelle Soucy. I'm with the Ministry of Agriculture and Food. We work very closely with the Ministry of Forests on the water tables, and we are very active in helping make those difficult decisions when they need to be. We totally understand right now that there is going to be some pretty serious impacts for our producers, particularly in these areas that are drought affected. Most kind of critically right now would be those sectors that rely on unirrigated forage. So we're looking at a pretty serious feed situation for our cattle producers and dairy producers. So we are working, we're working with our federal counterparts to try to actively assess what the situation is, get a handle on what those needs are, and then put in what's called an agri-recovery request to help producers get back on their feet and maintain their herds. I might ask my colleague Mark Raymond to step in and just do a little bit more details on how we actually work with the water tables in the Ministry of Forests to set priorities about water use, because it is complicated.
Thanks, Michelle. We've got staff throughout the province that are linked in with regional drought tables that feed up into our provincial discussions and working with the Ministry of Forests to ascertain and assess the impacts to the agricultural community. And when there are decisions being made regarding temporary protection orders or any regulatory tools, agriculture is part of those discussions, and the impact to agriculture is taken into consideration as part of those overarching decisions.
Our next question is for Lisa Yusta, City News 1130. Please go ahead.
Hi there. I heard the answer to the earlier question about why not doing restrictions now, but I guess I'm just not hearing it, and I'm wondering if people who hear this, and the public are going to hear this as well. Like, if this situation is severe, if as like that, there's is getting critical with the access to clean drinking water, why not just impose restrictions now so people get how imperative it is?
So part of the work of the Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness, part of our efforts since we were created in December was to be able to provide more proactive information to communities and to the public. So when we are forecasting situations, we want to get out ahead of it and start talking about it publicly. Some of these situational updates that we've been providing since April are meant to do that. They're meant to signal to the public what is coming. One of the challenges when it comes to drought is that we will be able to forecast a drought situation long before people will feel it on the ground. So for a lot of community members, I recognize that it might not feel real right now. We are here saying that absolutely it is real. Communities are putting in water restrictions. We need people to follow them. We are asking communities to escalate water restrictions, and that's going to be happening as soon as this afternoon. Well, pardon me, let me be clear. As soon as this afternoon, we are actually meeting with community leaders to discuss this and work with them to escalate those water restrictions.
Lisa, did you have a follow-up?
It is very clear, because that's one of the other things that you've also spoken about, but perhaps you can put a finer point on it like you did with that answer just there about how people are going to feel this. Are you going to see that you're not going to be able to get meat products? You're not going to be able to get vegetables? Like, how is this going to impact people's daily lives other than just watering their lawn?
We are actively working to assess the situation and understand the longer term impacts of an extreme drought situation. Right now, what we're asking people is to start conserving water now. We will continue to provide these updates in the future, and as more information comes forward, we'll be sharing that publicly as well.
Our next question is for Wolf Debner, Black Press. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you for taking my question. I'm just looking at slide 17 here, and if I read that slide correctly, BC has never been drier on this day than it has been today, based on the available data. How long do you expect this trend to continue?
Jonathan, is he still on the line?
River Forecast Center. It's never been like this early. Really, the drought program kicked into gear about maybe 12 years ago or so. So we don't necessarily have the records of drought levels. Looking back on some of the historic statistics on those hydrographs, there were some years that did stand out that you can spot in long-term records. One of them being 1926, which I don't think any of us have experience direct and firsthand, but looking back at the climate record from 1926, it was a very hot and warm April, and may have been the warmest April on record. And it was also warm in March as well. So that might have been a year where the snowpack melted even earlier. Where it didn't show up as much was in the higher elevations, the upper Fraser, the typical areas that melt a little bit later on in the season. So we have had years where it may have actually been a little bit worse at this time for, say, Vancouver Island and the South Coast. An example of that was in 2015, when the snowpack there around April 1st was around maybe 14 to 25% of normal for those regions. Whereas this year it was maybe just a little bit below normal. So we did have pretty good snowpack. And every year, of course, is a little bit different. 2019, we had a very hot May, and it looked like we were trending into a potential province-wide drought situation. But then rains came in July and August. And in recent memory, it was the worst kind of weather conditions, but it was fantastic from a wildfire situation. It wasn't very busy in 2019. So much just depends. If it is already at this level right now, typically we are moving into the driest months of the year, especially for the South Coast and Vancouver Island, which is July through August. And it really is going to revolve around what will happen come September and October, and whether we get the province-wide precipitation events, such as things like atmospheric rivers. We do need big rainfall events and multiple rainfall events to actually get us out of this drought situation. For the interior, that can still happen in July and August, just based on the weather patterns, that there are weather systems that can be widespread and rainy. But really, only time will tell. It looks like for the moment, at least the next 5 to 6 days, still just kind of showery thunderstorm activity. There always is kind of a possibility of wetter conditions, spotting that maybe early next week, but some weather models show it, some don't, and really it just depends on time and what we actually do experience through the summer here.
Wolf, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, this might be a long shot question, but has the ministry or has government generally looked to other jurisdictions to see if there are any points of comparisons, say in Australia or in other parts of the southern hemisphere, where you can sort of draw any sort of policy recommendations, any sort of ideas onto how to deal with an event of this magnitude, of this type? Is there a role, a case that you can study and say, okay, this is how things are going to unfold. These are the measures that we need to take.
I think it's fair to say that we are always trying to learn more about what other jurisdictions do during situations like this, and on every topic. We're constantly doing jurisdictional scans to understand what has and hasn't worked in other areas. However, it is also extremely important to note that British Columbia will face a different situation from different provinces, from different states. Our water basins are different, our culture is different, our landscape is different. So we really do need to approach the situation from a localized level as well. We really have to make sure that what we're doing works for British Columbia and British Columbians, given our unique ecosystem, our economy, and our people. But I'll also open it up to Peter Brock to see if he has any other comments that he wanted to offer.
And Peter Brock, Executive Director for Provincial and Regional Operations. So as the Minister mentioned, we're always looking elsewhere. It's worth mentioning the Watershed Security Strategy and Fund Survey that went out for intentions paper on behalf of the province. That certainly is based on best practices. So we always are looking at that. When we look at some of the proactive measures that the province took early on in the season, meeting with communities very early, hosting seasonal readiness meetings in the early spring to really work with communities, convey the concern for drought, really encourage proactive approach to managing it locally, and also providing a suite. The province has provided a number of suites of tools to support. All of those efforts are based on best practices, and when we bring in experts and consultants to help us work through these policy challenges, it's always based on what other jurisdictions are doing. So generally, when you bring experts to the table, they draw on expertise around the world, and the benefit of that is that British Columbia is well positioned to continually evolve and progress in the hazard of drought. So I'll maybe leave it there. Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry, our next question is from Adil Ahmed, CFJC News, Kamloops.
Thank you for taking my question there. My question is, given how dry parts of the province are right now and how it could potentially become, will there be an announcement going forward about water restrictions province-wide?
So many communities have already implemented water restrictions, and will be appealing to communities to escalate their drought response plans and escalate their water restrictions as well. We prefer to work with communities to implement those restrictions, bring the public along so that they understand why it is that these restrictions are needed. However, at the same time, we are actively looking at possible orders for water license fees if required. I know that the BC Energy Regulator has already implemented water restrictions for the oil and gas sector. It is likely that more restrictions are on the way.
Adil, did you have a follow-up?
No follow-up. Thank you.
We have time for one more question today. Our final question goes to Andrew McLeod, the Tyee. Please go ahead.
Yeah, hi. A few responses ago, you talked about steps that could be taken with licensees under the Water Sustainability Act. My memory is there were quite a few commercial users who estimated, a high estimated number who did not license. I'm wondering what those, or possibly what steps have already.
Sorry, Andrew, we're losing your audio. Do you mind repeating that, please?
Yeah, a few responses ago, you talked about steps that could be taken with licensees under the Water Sustainability Act. My memory is that when the act was put in place, there were a significant number of estimated commercial users of water who didn't take licenses out. I'm wondering what steps made with those folks already and what they should expect going forward.
I think that's probably a question for Connie.
Straightforward. So when the Water Sustainability Act was implemented, it brought into effect groundwater regulation, and we did require existing users of groundwater to apply for water licenses. All existing users have had to apply for a water license at this point in time. If an individual has not applied for a water license at this point in time, they've missed that window, and therefore we're in a situation where if someone is utilizing water without having submitted an application or holding a water license, and they are utilizing water in an unauthorized way under the Water Sustainability Act, and currently staff are working to identify those users and issue orders under the Water Sustainability Act to require them to cease the use. In addition, compliance and enforcement is also providing support in that space and utilizing tools that they have.
Andrew, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, great. So they can issue those kinds of orders. Do you have a number, like how many orders like that have been issued, say in this season? And I'm wondering also, is there an update on the estimated number of users who did?
I don't have a number. Addressing unauthorized use is the day-to-day business that we undertake on every single day throughout the whole year. So I don't have a specific number for this year as to how many orders have been issued or not. And unauthorized use is one of those changing numbers where people choose to utilize water or don't in accordance with the legislation. So that is constantly changing.
Thank you, everyone. That's all the time we have for today.